Wonderful. Last session, last creative conversation. And the disruptive designer and architect, more of him in a minute, has asked, if you want to stay, would you come to the front so he can have an intimate session? Thank you. Thomas Heatherwick trained as a 3D designer, but he's now an architect with a studio of over 250 people, and they've produced buildings and structures in 6 continents. He's done everything from designing districts to transport systems, to the London bus, to a car that eats pollution. He's put parks on rivers, he's put trees in the sky, he's carved out a concrete grain silo to make a museum. He's also a writer, an artist, an activist. He's launched a campaign called Humanize against what he calls the pandemic of boring buildings around the world. So he's that word that keeps coming up again and again today, a disruptor. Please welcome to the stage for the final conversation, Thomas Heatherwick. He's here.
Right, I was already here.
Thomas, I've listed everything, but how do you describe yourself?
Oh, do I have to?
You do.
You do. Okay, I'm a designer. That seems broad enough. I'm interested in the public world around us and how it makes people feel and how it works. And so I was 11 years old, and my father took me to a place called the Design Council in London, and there was this big sign that said the Design Centre. And I'd thought I wanted to be an inventor when I was little, but then in the British mindset, the word inventor had the word mad stuck at the beginning of it. And so it wasn't taken seriously, but design seemed to be a word. But now you go to Silicon Valley and everyone's an inventor, and invention was sort of understood as the thing that we're hunting for. You know, good writing is inventive, good paintings or things. Everyone's sort of looking for an inventive step with a reason, and so I'm happy that that word has come back.
Inventors tend to imply, I mean, let's forget the mad sobriquet, but individuals thinking, creating. There's this constant tension that's emerged in the first day today of the Culture Summit between individual creativity and collective mindset and collective creativity. You obviously have capacity for both, but how does it sit with you as someone who's done and is doing so many things between your ideas, and I keep doing this because of the hand scale of things, and working with a team of people in 6 continents to scale entire districts? How do you work in different scales, and how does the individual and the collaborative interplay with you?
When I was little, and I was good at art and I was good at ideas, but I remember how slow things go. You could think things through, and then when I got to universities are always about sort of individual achievement. And at the Royal College of Art, it was quite funny sitting there at the desks where there were lots of people, because it was so hard to get in, and each one was thinking, I must be really good because I'm at the Royal College. But everyone was sort of alone, and I remember you was sitting there trying to be brilliant as everybody thought each other should be, and then there was an engineer who had come in, and when he came in and sat down and you started talking, you forgot who was the designer, and ideas sort of grew between you. And words like collaboration are very fashionable, but I actually realized my problem, my image of the genius was that they sit there by themselves in the bath or wherever, leaping out with their one idea. And I found that for me, ideas grew when working with people, and that the university setup was all based on sort of individualized genius. So that thing that I thought was wrong with me was that it turned out actually it's to be a true way to work. So in my studio, in a way, I convene and we sort of shake things around and discuss them. And my job is to sort of almost corral them together. And I mean, the projects that are being shown here, I think there's something wrong when it's my idea. I mean, I won't tell anyone if something is, but the best time is when it genuinely is the idea, and you can't unpick who and when the idea came from, but you're trying to cook it and sort of set up the conditions that leads to the right ideas.
I didn't want to get onto AI that much with you because we've had all sorts of interesting conversations about it today, and we will tomorrow and the next day. But do you care if AI helps you generate ideas then? It's just how you harness it and how you nuance it. Are you using AI?
Yeah, I mean, we've had AI in the software we've been using for a long time, and it's been getting better and better. I suppose I see it as a tool. It doesn't have ideas, and it doesn't have a point of view, and it doesn't really love or engage, and it doesn't question the question. So that project on the screen at the moment, Little Island in New York.
Hudson River, yeah.
We weren't asked to do an island. We were asked to do a building thing that would be a fancy building sitting on a design they already had for a piece of enlargement of Manhattan. And we were there thinking, well, you're going to spend money on the thing, and you're spending money on that. What if you put it together? And actually the fun of being on a pier is not being on a bigger bit of the land, but being more over the water. And so my point is, we questioned the question. And AI would be very good at answering the question, but not answering, actually just giving a million options. But I don't think AI knows when to question the question. And I mean, we were doing something that was not permitted by the competition. You know, in effect, we broke the brief. But the best projects break the brief. And I've found, because often the brief is quite uncreative. So it's the quality of the question that matters. And so I'm not worried because the AI can synthesize really well. And so we're using it for visualizing, but it spews out lots of rubbish. And your art is to try and figure out actually an idea. And so just chucking lots of stuff at you isn't the issue. You're trying to find what's the idea, and that leads things. And that has to be led by a real conversation and real stories. And some of the things that speakers were speaking about earlier today.
The idea of listening to people and engaging with the public it rings true for many. But how do you do it with buildings in the built environment? I mean,
how do you listen to the public?
Yeah, how do you engage them in a meaningful way? Because I know you want to start this dialogue much more, and this campaign about boring buildings, which we can talk a little bit about. But how do you meaningfully engage?
Well, one of the things I'm interested in is, in a way, the catastrophe I experienced as a little person going out into the world, seeing the new pieces of city that were being built, and they just seemed so inhuman. It was like, that's rubbish, you know, basically characterlessness, soullessness, and we all knew it. And always, I mean, new districts, there might be an amazing art museum and an amazing opera house, but when you speak to people, everybody, they'll all say, bit characterless, a bit soulless about pieces of city in general. And so there's a problem we all know, but no one's got the confidence about. And so I remember hearing someone say, use yourself as data. I mean, I don't think the answer is you've got to ask everyone in the world their opinion. But typically, as you become a professionalized 7 years of training, whether you're a city planner, whether you're an architect, whatever, whether you're a doctor, there are amazing things about 7 years of training, but it can also make you lose touch of common sense, a sort of common sense reaction to places as your brain knows the theory so much. And I think we've had a time where we've lost touch with the importance of emotion as a function. And so the Humanized book and the Humanized campaign is about tuning in to the built world around us and having a conversation about it, because people feel so powerless. And so I'm not advocating with the campaign that you have to ask everyone their opinion. But in our studio, most of the time, what you're imagining is not like what I think is my great idea. You're trying to imagine how someone will feel who hasn't come to your lecture, hasn't read your book, because the public world that we share around us, the walls of public life, what a responsibility to be creating places that need to last for centuries, not just decades. And so that place has to be thinking about feelings. And certainly architecture, I can speak for, gets very intellectualized, theory-driven. Everyone knows most new places become soulless, but there's also an economic driver, and there's no public conversation to balance out. So the average age of a commercial building in the United Kingdom is 40 years. So if I was a commercial building, I would have been killed 15 years ago. And so it's like, what the hell? The amount of carbon in making buildings that are boring, don't engage people, that no one will fight to restore, renovate, or extend. The environmental impact is 5 times the whole of the aviation industry. It's like a dirty secret we don't talk about. We build places that no one cares about, no one will fight for, and then 40 years later, knock them down because we didn't design for your great-granddaughter. And what would she feel like? And there are some universal things about ways people respond.
Well, that's what I want to ask you about, because obviously I take the point you can't do mass surveys of people, so it has to be empathy. It has to be, what will trigger people's sensitive response? How will they respond to these buildings? How do you determine something that isn't just your taste? And an architectural style has a lot to do with taste as well as context. What are the measures? What are the drivers to make buildings that aren't boring or that are sensitive to people or spectacular? How do you gauge it?
Well, I'm pleased you've asked that, because what's so interesting is that there is the prevailing attitude in the profession I work within is that if you don't like what I do, you're probably quite ignorant. And that's horrific. Who are you designing for? So we have echo chambers, like the art world gets into echo chambers, architecture world gets into echo chambers. And so I think the beginning thing is to really look. There's a lot of emphasis as you as the genius when you're in the world of building design, rather than you as in a social watcher of how do people respond to places, and to not just laugh at them if they like old-fashioned buildings and think, oh, well, if you ask the public what they want, they just want old-fashioned buildings. Because that's not true. When you really look, the public like modern buildings, but they like places that have human-scale detail and engaging dimensions. And the architecture world hates the idea of measuring, hates the idea of actually surveying. It's really interesting because looking at how a thing you did behaved, how people responded to what you did afterwards, is not normal. So the emphasis is always on the inside. So often when I've spoken to practices, they'll say, well, when I finish a building, I'm really good. We do post-occupancy surveys. We ask 46 questions of how people have responded and think what they think of the building we did. But when you ask, who did you ask? They're asking the people inside the building. But 1,000 times more people will go past the outside of the building. So the humanized campaign is, and normally new buildings, the daylight's fine, the lobby's good, there's a nice big artwork and a marble desk or whatever they want to have, but it's changeable. The outside of a building you can't change. And the outside of a building, so the passers-by are an unloved, unthought about in 99% of buildings. When it's an opera house, they are. When it's a art museum, they are. But the 99% of buildings is the challenge that I think will only be solved by a public conversation. And that came about because I met the chief medical officer of Great Britain, and I'd been asked, like, what's your dream project? And I'd said, a hospital in this thing. And then they sort of said, well, why? And I said, well, because they're so rubbish. Certainly in the United Kingdom, the actual emotional experience of the design that's there is so unempathic. And the next week I was contacted by the chief medical officers of the Great Britain. And so I was introduced to this woman, and I sort of had the conversation with her, and I said, so you're in charge? And she said, I'm not in charge. There's many trusts, there's no one in charge. There's all these different trusts. But the only way you'll make change with hospitals, care homes, clinics, and surgeries is with patient pull. And I remember thinking, what is patient pull? And what she meant was that the basically managers of all the different health trusts, everyone's busy, everyone's got money pressures, everyone's just trying to do their job. But if the patients speak and say, like, oh, you're doing a new cancer care centre, have you seen the one in Scotland made from wood? Or the one in Yorkshire with trees on? That kind of will sink in. And so in effect, the profound point for me there was that half-decent leaders don't lead with their chest out. They're listeners. A half-decent leader listens, whether that's in politics or wherever, but it depends on whether the public speak. And we have no public conversation about the streets around us. People talk about their own private homes and how wonderful, and there's makeover programs about how to make your home, but we don't talk about the walls of public life. And I'm interested now more than ever with the digital technologies. We have a kind of crisis in public life. You don't need the shops in as much as we used to. So those were reasons people left their home. You don't have to go to work. You don't have to go to university. And we've got birth rates plummeting. Yeah, I'm trying to argue that it's all about reproduction more. But we have the lonely century. A friend of mine wrote a book called The Lonely Century, and the title breaks your heart. So patient pull, unless we talk and not think, oh, well, I don't really know. I'm a bit. It's like you've lived in buildings as long as I have, and people are smart. I think the idea that everyone isn't smart, I think, is wrong.
What about, I said at the beginning, you've worked in 6 continents. I'm sure Antarctica's on the agenda. Where is doing this well? I mean, where is good practice? We know the United Kingdom isn't great. There's parts of Europe that aren't. But in the buildings that you've made and in the designs you've been commissioned to do, and it is often about the commissioning, the enlightenment comes from clients. Where are examples of good practice? Where can we learn from?
I think there are isolated examples. But the reason we launched the campaign is because actually nowhere's doing it well. There's hardly anywhere where everyday buildings are being given humanizing dimension. And I'm not arguing that buildings should all look like museums and be crazy shapes at all. The Victorians in the United Kingdom bashed out millions of boxes, but they had humanized details in those boxes. And we are in a time where we need millions of homes again in the UK and many parts of the world. And so but we've got a thing where less terrible housing wins prizes because it's not as bad as the other stuff. There are very few examples of really fantastic housing at scale which feels human, because we all think we're special. I mean, all 8 billion of us think we're special, and so often places sort of don't play to that need we all have to feel somehow that our life has story to it. We're working a lot in South Korea at the moment. I wouldn't say they're doing it well, but they are really interested. And so we are having conversations with the city about one of the cities there becoming an official sort of humanized city. I'm the director of the Seoul Architecture Biennale this year, and we're trying to not have a biennale for the architecture industry to talk to itself again, but to really have a conversation with the whole city. And the mayor is really passionate about that, and there's a head architect for the city who helps to make the space for a citywide conversation. So there are examples, but one thing we've been trying to do is also get the science side, because actually this is a public health crisis. And we don't think architecture has positioned itself as an art. Well, no, I'm an art. And even famous figures like Le Corbusier and many other very famous people in the world of architecture have described it as the art above all other arts.
The mother of the arts.
The mother of the arts. But the problem is it's different, because if you look at paintings as an art, and if something is jarring and somehow it doesn't connect with you, you don't have to buy it. You can walk out of the gallery. If music is triggering for you in some way, you can take the headphones off and you can stop your subscription to Spotify or whatever it was. But buildings, I'm trying to change. We need much more humility, because in the world of business, we talk about servant leadership, and really good organizations, often the CEO is sort of the humblest person in the organization. Their job is to lift others. And I really feel we need a reset of this mother of all arts story, because it's the art no one can get away from. And so actually, we need servant architecture. You are a public servant, and there's too much reverence to the client and their needs inside, but not the balancing. What are you giving to society?
You've written a book, you've launched a campaign, you're trying to turn a city in Korea into a humanized prototype, I suppose. How are you using the Biennale as a calling card for this?
Well, our book became a bestseller in South Korea, which was like, whoa, what happened there? And the sort of condition of doing it was that it would be for all the citizens of Seoul. And so we're not having it in an architecture gallery over to the side or in conference spaces. We're taking over a park in the center of the city, and we're going to build walls. We're commissioning some jewelers, artists, architects, some quite well-known fashion designers and different architects to build pieces of buildings. So it's visceral, physical, and we are going to speak in plain Korean, plain English, no jargon, or what it gets called archibolics, I think it's normally called. And so that it's for 12-year-olds or 99-year-olds. And so that's what's quite exciting at the moment, is trying to sort of communicate and make a public, walls of public life story and celebrate how precious it is coming together. And South Korea has got the thing of the lowest birth rate on the planet, and it's also got the biggest suicide in young people on the planet. And so there's a very real factor that the built environment, I believe, contributes to that. And we've also been with this public health agenda, and once we frame architecture as a public health agenda, it's very interesting, because if it's health, we actually need to look at the science. And so in our studio, we've been bringing together neuroscientists and neuroaesthetics researchers, and we had this hilarious kind of drop the mic moment 3 weeks ago, where there was one of the main researchers looking at 4-month-old babies. So they had eye-tracking software, little headsets on these 4-month-old babies, and they were showing them boring building with some fascination. And you watch these babies And they were this there, and you could see exactly where they're looking with these heat maps. And they always went straight away from the boring building to something with some fascination. And the words I'm finding useful is to talk about nutrition. You know how 30, 40 years ago, if you spoke about ultra-processed foods, or people thought you must be a hippie if you had a problem with that. Like, when I was little, my mum would make me take seaweed to school to eat. And my friends looked at me like, what? And there were dried bananas that looked like cat poo. And I remember I was so embarrassed doing this. And that felt like that was freaky. But look how society has changed. 30, 40 years later, I bet you've all eaten seaweed. I'm not sure about the cat poo bananas. But the point being, we now talk about the nutritional value. And we've had kind of ultra-processed buildings that don't give you visual nutrition. And those babies were looking for the nutrition. And what we've been learning from the researchers is that we, as humans, are infovores. You know, like a carnivore eats meat. But actually, we need to be processing millions of bits of information every few seconds. So when you have buildings that are too flat, too plain, too shiny, too anonymous, too monotonous, and too serious, they're not calm, zen, subtle, clean lines. Actually, you're starving the brain of a necessary visual complexity. And so that's feeling really exciting. So it's nothing to do with, in a way, the design you're seeing by my studio is my reaction. This is 30 years of projects, sort of reacting like, damn it, why is this like this? But in general, we've had the chance to work on the 1% of projects. And I think that when society speaks, and just as now, we do demand ecological performance. No corporation can build a building that hasn't got really good environmental credentials, because the investors will be embarrassed because society says that's not good. But we haven't progressed to the bit where we know that we need buildings to be more engaging and human. So my point is, people are willing to spend a bit more because society has said, we've got to generate our own power. We can't be so energy inefficient. But that wasn't like that 30 years ago. And we have inhuman buildings that we build. Even the 4-month-old babies think they're rubbish. And then they're pulled down. And then we build boring buildings again. And no one cares. So I think the science and the health agenda will help.
I love the idea that you're co-opting 4-month-old babies onto your campaign. But I actually can respond to the idea of how they might respond. You're picking a fight with the world. I said, who's doing it well? You said, well, no one really, but we're trying in this place. You've antagonized certain sections of your profession. You're more broadly a designer across the piece, but certain parts of the architectural profession have got sort of slightly prickly. It's obviously a fight you feel passionate about. Are you optimistic? I don't want to personalize this. It's not whether you can win, but do you believe fundamentally that in the next 15, 20 years, we can humanize cities much more, that we can produce interesting buildings?
Yeah. By the way, actually, British architecture has the problem that kind of no one's interested. There are only 3 journalists, full-time journalists, in national papers who write about it. The Sterling Prize, which was a main architecture thing, has come off television. So the problem is we've not been communicating well with the people we should be caring most about, which is society. So actually we've had enormously positive responses from people who are, because we're just trying to make conversation happen. I'm not arguing for beauty. Like there's what's beauty, but there's a necessary visual level of detail and complexity. You can call it ornaments, you can call it decoration, you can call it detail. And so actually, that's something that will allow the architecture profession that feels marginalized to fly. And our book in the UK has become a bestseller there. So actually people are responding, and we're finding there's some momentum. And I just know that, I mean, who thought that smoking would be banned in pubs? Like, wow, that felt like something that would never change. School lunches used to be terrible. And then gradually people looked and went, what's the actual nutritional value? The treatment of chickens used to be terrible. Everyone just accepted that's how it was. So I know that we are getting smarter about and looking, and so just giving more confidence to people to say what they feel and use themselves as data and not think that they're stupid and not be patronized by over-professionalized professions, which I think can easily happen when something's like, it's kind of common sense that we all know, but sort of to be given permission to think and wonder and talk. And that powerlessness that people feel, actually you have a lot of power, you just don't realize you do.
On which passionate and candid note, I think we need to end. It's really interesting, Thomas, hearing you talk about the issues and the problems, but that kind of fundamental belief in human beings. This idea about individual against collaborative and the power of human beings to forge their own futures and to deal with the challenges and to harness problems as potential allies is something that's gone throughout the whole day. Tomorrow we're going to look at new frontiers of a post-human environment. It's going to include a ministerial dialogue. You need to be here to make your case from the audience with ministers about commissioning boring environments and so on. Networking starts at 9 o'clock here, and then the sessions start at 9:30. One thing that we haven't said today, but spread the word, you need to download the app and bring your headphones tomorrow for translation. Anyway, after a very intensive day, thank you all very much for taking part, and thank you, Thomas, for finishing it. Great.
Thank you.